Welcome to your astrological forecast for the week of Monday, August 19th through Sunday, August 25th, 2024. All right, y'all. This week will be particularly interesting. We still have Mercury retrograde this week, and honestly, that's not even close to the most interesting part of the week. I don't know if I've told you, but I know so far I've told you that the past couple weeks have been part of this transitional period, right? That's how I see the astrology developing really for much of August and even for part of September as well. We are pivoting. It's a turning point of some kind. I've mentioned that much, but I don't think I've mentioned that I've felt something coming on, and sometimes I can feel like energies, like there's these waves of energy where it'll be relatively mild for a little bit, and then I can feel these waves like before they come in. I know that sounds really weird, but even as far back as a few months ago, I had this weird feeling that something intense was going to happen in September. I wasn't sure what, and I've looked at the astrology for September, and honestly, what I'm saying right now is completely based off of my own intuition. It's not necessarily based on the astrology, so it's strictly speaking, it's not actually relevant astrologically. But I just thought I would mention it because I think we're getting closer. Something big is going to happen, and it's not just for my personal life; it's for the world as well. I mean, we can see that everything is so crazy in the world, but specifically for September and maybe even late August, there's just some kind of development that we're getting much closer to, and I think this week is definitely a part of that. This week we've got some major aspects where shit really will hit the fan, so to speak, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So I'm gonna be totally honest. When I first looked at the the astrology for this week, and specifically for Monday, let's just cut to the chase. Whoa, cut to the chase. Sorry, I just bit my tongue. For Monday, August 19th, we've definitely got a full moon. We will definitely talk about that. But other than that, for Monday, when I first looked at the astrology, I thought, at first I just saw it as this whole laundry list of different aspects. So, Venus opposing Saturn, Venus squaring Jupiter, Sun squaring Uranus. There's the full moon, and there's Jupiter square Saturn. A much simpler way to talk about that would be to talk about T squares. And really, the whole theme of this week's forecast is T squares. So I don't know if you're aware of T squares in astrology. I know some of you probably are, some of you aren't. It pretty much is what it sounds like. It's basically two squares and an opposition. So for example, the full moon in itself, you can't see my pointer, but the sun is at the top of the chart here. This is actually the exact chart for the full moon. So this is the chart specifically for 2:26 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Monday, August 19th, 2024. I gave you the specific chart for the full moon. But a full moon, let's just start with the full moon because that in itself is part of a T-square. So we've got the sun at 27 degrees Leo. It's being opposed by the moon, which is at 27 degrees Aquarius. So in other words, sun is at the top of the chart, moon is at the bottom of the chart. And we have one planet that is simultaneously squaring both the moon and the sun from Taurus, and that would be Uranus at 27 degrees Taurus. So it's a pretty exact T-square. So 3 points, sun, moon, and Uranus, all, well, I was going to say all equally apart. I guess that's not technically accurate. You've got the sun on one side, moon on the other side, and then Uranus is kind of like the middle point, the focal point, halfway in between both the sun and the moon. So, as if that wasn't crazy enough, we actually have two separate T-squares today. So there's the one that I just talked about with the sun, moon, and Uranus, and then there's a separate one coinciding on the same day between Venus, Saturn, and Jupiter in mutable signs. So we've got a fixed T-square in Aquarius, Taurus, and Leo, and we've got a mutable T-square in Pisces, Gemini, and Virgo. A lot to break down. Most of this week's forecast is going to be talking about Monday. I do have some stuff to talk about for Thursday as well, though. But anyway, so for Monday, again, let's go back to the full moon. So the full moon in itself, it does look like a particularly spicy one. Even if we cast away these T-squares, I almost said something completely different. Even if we didn't even focus on the T squares. This full moon I would say would be particularly intense because it is in fixed signs. Sun in Leo, which is fixed, moon in Aquarius, which is fixed. It's kind of like Leo and Aquarius are facing off in this grand, opposition. And both are fixed signs, so they're both very strong-willed energies. And so when you combine them, it's very theatrical. There's a huge element of culmination, right? Both Leo and Aquarius can be party animals. It's party energy, it's group energy. It's also very individualistic energy as well, though. Both Leo and Aquarius are yang energies. So whenever you have a full moon in a fire, or in this case in an air sign, it's particularly active and volatile because you have both the sun and the moon in yang or masculine signs. They're both in active signs. They're both very spontaneous energies. So yeah, that's why I say this is a particularly intense one. I would typically say an Aquarius full moon would be a great day to have some kind of party. But again, it is on a Monday. And then also we've got all these T-squares. T-squares, it's the energy of an opposition with two squares at the same time. So we've already got this culmination face-off between the sun and the moon. You could also include Mercury in that as well because we just had that Mercury-Sun conjunction in Leo as well. So if you want to be really technical, Sun and Mercury are still conjunct, basically, both being opposed by the moon. And then also we've got this whole third dimension of Uranus in Taurus squaring both of those points. So square energy is all about change, right? Oppositions are about culmination. I guess you could say climax, although everyone kind of snickers at that word. Culmination is a good word for that. You've got the culmination happening, but you also have this intense need for change because of the two simultaneous squares happening within this T-square. Does that make sense? So T-squares can be very intense, very volatile. It's a huge time of change. You need to make some kind of change. I need to make some kind of change. We all need to adapt and make change when we've got T-squares like this. Does that make sense? And really, I would point to the areas that this is highlighting, but really, I mean, we have 6 signs involved in 2 separate T-squares. So really, I mean, regardless of your astrology, you're bound to have at least 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 or 4 points in your chart being lit up by these by these aspects that are all happening simultaneously. Hopefully I'm not kind of just rambling on too much. I hope I'm explaining this in a way that you can understand. But it's a lot. I haven't even talked about the second T-square yet. But yeah, having a full moon being, I guess, squared by Uranus, I guess you could say, T squared by Uranus, it makes this particularly intense. It makes it that much more volatile because Uranus is volatile. It's the most unpredictable energy, and you have that directly aspecting both the sun and the moon at a time of a full moon, which is, a full moon is already unpredictable in itself, right? You could also say full moon is in Aquarius, which is kind of ruled by Uranus, so that's even more Uranian energy. This is the energy of earthquakes, maybe literally, but also figuratively. It's the energy of, like, a lot of us are going to wake up on Monday and suddenly realize something, and that's the dangerous part. Like, we may be privy to new information, new insights. This will be particularly interesting because of Mercury retrograde's influence, because that's involved too. It's conjunct the sun for this whole full moon T-square thing. So a lot of this new information may actually be old. It may be about the past. Maybe something has been going on for a long time that you haven't been aware of. Not trying to make you paranoid, but I mean, really, if you think about it, there's always more that we could, there's always more insights that we're not privy to or we're not paying attention to. There's always more awareness for us to have on our current or maybe even past situations. So I think that, these are the uncomfortable truths that we may be realizing on and around Monday, August 19th. So this is very exciting. It can also be very stressful. Go for a walk, meditate, spend time in nature, breathe, and then do those things so that you figure out what the change is that you need to make, and then go out and make this change. You can do it. Okay. Whatever it is, you can do it. Like I said, much of this change that's happening is on a mental orientation. We're changing mentally. We're realizing things. We're waking up, and the uncomfortable part is using that new information or that new awareness and deciding, now what? Okay, I've got more answers. now what do I do? Do I just do nothing, and now I just have this new awareness that I'm not going to do anything with? Or what do I do about it? That's the difficult part, because there's responsibility there. Really, I'm just giving my Uranus spiel, but that's what's so relevant here with this full moon. I think Uranus almost steals the show from what would typically be just kind of a particular. This would normally be just a crazy day. It would normally just be, oh, we were so active and so wild, we were a little rowdy. That would be an Aquarius full moon. But with Uranus squaring both, I mean, I can't get over this. This is just so wild. It's just going to be that much more intense. There could be much more life events, sudden changes. I already covered the, changes in awareness and perception. It's going to be a mixed bag when it comes to, where is the change coming from? Is it coming from within us, from our dreams, from our, mentality? Is it just changes in the way we're seeing things, or is what we're looking at actually changing? And really the answer is both. Everything is just, it's really like the carpet is being swept from under our feet today, I think. But it's not all bad. I mean, I view Uranus energy as neutral. Yes, it is disruptive, but that disruption can be positive. It can be constructive. It's kind of destructive, but also constructive at the same time. It's creative, I guess you could say, and it's really an excellent opportunity for furthering our growth and gaining more awareness, which I know if you're listening to this forecast, I know that that's what you're all about. So that's one reason to be potentially excited for this. However, I have known multiple astrologers who have said Uranus is their least favorite planet. I love Uranus. It's actually one of my favorites, but I can sympathize why, those of us that don't like change fear aspects like this. But there's nothing we can do. We have to embrace it, go with the flow. This can be exciting. Learn something new. Try some, your life could be so much better, right? And it's aspects like this that, come along and wake us up to possibilities that, we may have never known about otherwise. Okay, let's talk about this other T-square and get that out of the way. So as if, everything I've just said, that would be a lot on its own. But we have a second T-square, and really if you think about it, the first T-square actually involved 4 planets because of Moon, Uranus, and then Sun and Mercury being conjunct. The second T-square is similar because we've got Venus at 18 degrees Virgo. Saturn is opposing Venus. I think technically Venus is opposing Saturn at 17 degrees Pisces, and at the same time Venus is also squaring Jupiter and Mars in Gemini. So you've got Mars and Jupiter still conjunct in Gemini, forming a T-square, forming 2 squares on either side with both Venus and Virgo and Saturn in Pisces. It's also important to note that we also have a retrograde planet in this T-square as well. I mean, this is wild, We'll have several weeks where there's not a lot happening. And then, it's only inevitable that eventually we get to a week like this, which is much more juicy for me to talk about. But anyway, so yeah, Saturn is retrograde roughly halfway through Pisces, opposing Venus, squaring Mars and Jupiter. So I was going to say this T-square is particularly crazy. Really, both the T-squares are very crazy. With a fixed T-square, it's particularly intense because you're combining multiple fixed signs. So the fixed signs are the most strong-willed energies. They're the most stubborn. They don't mix well with other energies. They are what they are. They're just solid. They're like rock. They're like boulders. So combining them together is kind of like crashing boulders together. That's very intense. They're not going to mix very well. A mutable T-square is also intense, but for a dramatically different reason. A mutable T-square is much more chaotic and much more frenetic. There's a lot. It's like a sandstorm. I'm picturing a sandstorm. So fixed T-square, crashing rocks together or boulders together. Mutable T-square, it's like throwing dust or sand. It just becomes this huge mess. It's all intertwined because within each particular mutable sign, each mutable sign is like very multifaceted and complex in itself. Virgo is complex and complicated. So is Pisces. So is Gemini. Even Pisces and Gemini literally have duality in their glyphs. So that just shows how, multi-sided they are. They're not like fixed signs. They're more complicated. So that's, even just within one mutable sign, it's already crazy and complicated and changing on its own. But now you're mixing not one, not two, but three mutable signs all colliding together. How do you combine the different sides of Virgo with the different sides of Gemini, with the different sides of Pisces? That's where I guess it's equally intense, but in a dramatically different way. And we're dealing with all of it. We're dealing with, now the only thing missing is we don't have a cardinal T-square. That would be just too much. This is already too much. So yeah. So, and it's just such a blend of energies. Venus is still in fall in Virgo. So when it comes to the pleasure, the desire, these things are lacking, or they're fleeting, or the things that we are desiring are a little bit unusual. They're things that we might normally look over or not appreciate. We're thinking outside the box when it comes to our pleasure and desire. And we're wanting something different, maybe something real, something, it's not just good enough to enjoy like shallow pleasures or superficial pleasures. With Venus and Virgo, we really want something real that's going to last. But at the same time, that can be more difficult. I guess we have maybe higher standards with our pleasure with Venus and Virgo. But that's being, how do I put that? Like, there's this conflict between what Venus represents in Virgo with what Mars and Jupiter represent in Gemini. How can you be, grounded and realistic and down to earth with your pleasures with Venus and Virgo, but also diversify and expand in a really bold way and, experience a lot of variety with Mars and Jupiter in Gemini? Those are really suggesting a really wild kind of expansion and being very experimental. And that's also very out of the box energy because Jupiter is debilitated as well. Jupiter is in detriment in Gemini. And then you're combining all of that with Saturn in Pisces, which is, that's a whole other thing too. Saturn in Pisces for really the better part of 2 years now. We've been kind of in the fog. We've been in a mini fog era where we don't know what's right. We don't know what's wrong. Like, we don't know what's real anymore. So combining all of it, honestly, it's too much to analyze. I think I could sit here for hours talking about all this, and I don't want to do that to you. So I'll just say that when you put all of it together, this is a huge need for change. It's a huge wake-up call. There's gonna be parts of your life, or maybe things going on in the world that just cannot be any longer. We need change. That's just really that simple. It really reminds me of the death card in tarot. It's not necessarily bad. It's just change. Everything changes. Everything, I learned this from Hermetics, where everything is always either in a state of growth or decay. Everything starts at some point, grows to a certain extent, peaks, and then decays, and then ends. Everything does that. Everything is always in a state of doing that. We are always cycling. That is just reality. That's just nature. I think astrology makes us even more painfully aware of that. But at the same time, I think it just shows you to appreciate things. Everything being so constantly changing, so temporary. Yeah, that can be scary and that can be sad. But I think understanding that can help us because I think oftentimes whatever we're experiencing, it feels like it's going to be forever. And so the good times we can take for granted, and the bad times we feel like it's going to be forever. We feel like, I feel crappy today. It's never going to end. It feels like it's always going to be that way. Or if you're sick, that's a good example. It feels like it's never going to end, but it will end. Everything ends. So what it's taught me is that during the bad times, just understand that the good times will come again and find peace in that. And when it's the good times, enjoy them because they will end at some point. Make the most of them, maintain them as best you can because everything is temporary. I don't know. I feel like that's a beautiful message. That's really helped me a lot. But anyway, now I'm just kind of lecturing you about change. But it's relevant. This is a huge... If these aspects aren't a sign of sudden change, I don't know what is. Let me just put it that way. And honestly, I think that's about as much as I have to say on that. The full moon in itself, everyone wants to talk about the full moon. And honestly, I don't have that much to say about full moons. Yes, they are intense. They are very tangible astrologically. It's very clear, for us to be aware of a full moon. But I think that their themes are relatively simple to analyze. I do think this one will also be particularly intense because of Mercury retrograde opposing the full moon at the same time, plus all that other T-square nonsense that I talked about. So yeah, it's going to be wild. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't necessarily say to just stay home and do nothing, but at the same time, I might refrain from doing anything too bold or too out there because the world just, I don't think it'll be a safe place on a day like today. I'm not saying that, to promote fear at all. Like, I'm not afraid of this. I'm just not expecting the world to be peaceful on a day like this. So I would just say to be careful, wear your seatbelt. And maybe don't, I don't know, if you can help it, don't travel or fly. I mean, we tend to want to avoid those things on a Mercury retrograde phase anyway. But if you do have to do those things, it's not the end of the world. I would just expect delays, expect the unexpected. Like, I think the worst thing to do on a day like today would be to have like a really strict, complicated plan. Like, let's say you're managing some really elaborate event, and this certain thing has to happen at 11:03, and then that needs to happen, so we'll be ready at 11:09. It's like, that's just not going to work. You know what I mean? Like, we have to go with the flow. Make your plans. I'm not saying to, we have things we need to do. Like, we're busy people. At least I am. So I'm saying, live your life, but at the same time, use reason. It's fine to have some kind of plan, but things may not go as planned on a day like today. Go with the flow, make the most of the change, be open, because like, rather than being sad about something ending or changing, why not be excited for what, something even better could come along? And, whatever it is that we hold on to that we appreciate in our lives, maybe that thing isn't going to end. Maybe we're just going to appreciate it in a new way. Like, maybe you'll still be part of the same relationship, but you'll just have a new understanding of it, a deeper understanding. You know what I mean? Things can change on that level as well. So anyway, I don't want to ramble anymore. There is this one other day I wanted to talk about for this week. And really, I'm going to be totally honest. Monday overshadows everything. We do have a couple other little aspects this week, which honestly I'm not even going to mention. I don't think it's worth your time. Monday is the big day. Monday is huge. You'll really feel this on, like, give or take a day or two as well. Even through the weekend before this forecast, Saturday and Sunday, for those of you that are first watching or listening to this when I first put it out, even as you're first listening to this, you may already be starting to feel this on Saturday the 17th or Sunday the 18th. And then, the same is true on the other side as well, even into Tuesday or Wednesday. This is a big deal, okay? And with these predictions, like, I can't predict what's going to happen. You know what I mean? Like, I can look at the astrology and for sure say, oh, this is going to be a peaceful day. This is going to be an intense day. All I can say is it's going to be very intense and there's going to be dramatic change. And a lot of people's minds might change, not just anecdotally or, not just like kind of on a personal level, but we may see this on a national level or an international level as well. Like, I know in America we're gearing up for this election. It wouldn't surprise me if something dramatic changed in that regard. Like, if the demographics changed, like maybe people start protesting a new issue that we hadn't even thought about before, or it's just hard to say. It's the only thing I can predict for sure is the unpredictability of it. Okay, for Thursday, August 22nd, this is not going to be as major of a day. The only thing is that the sun does enter Virgo, so happy Virgo season. Happy birthday, Virgos. This is your time to shine, those of you that have major Virgo placements. Yeah, really, if I'm being honest, this chart looks a little backward because now we have Venus and Sun in Virgo, where neither one is particularly happy, and then Mercury is still retrograde in Leo, so it's very backward. I think it would just be so much neater if we kept Mercury in Virgo, where it's exalted, and then Venus and the Sun in Leo, where Sun is at home, and I think Venus does well in Leo. But no, that's not what it is. We've got Venus and Sun in Virgo, Mercury in Leo, Mars in Gemini, Jupiter in Gemini. Really, all of the inner planets and the Sun are out of place, I would say. You know what I mean? Like, Venus is debilitated, Jupiter is debilitated, So both the major benefics are debilitated. Mars is in Gemini. Mars is kind of awkward in the air signs, I would say. Tends to prefer fire signs slash Scorpio. Mercury's in Leo. Some modern astrologers go as far as to say that Mercury is in fall in Leo. I don't believe that personally, but I do think Mercury is slightly out of place in Leo. Mercury is so analytical, questions everything, wants to improve everything. Leo's not about that at all, so it is a bit of a strange fit. Even Sun in Virgo. Virgo's the last sign of summer. It's kind of like wrapping up the party, so to speak. So I think that is, I don't know, it can be a bit of a buzzkill. Sun can be out of place there a little bit. So anyway, I guess I'm just saying, I don't know, things feel out of place. You may feel that as we go into Thursday and close out the week. Like, maybe part of it is the shitstorm that just happened at the beginning of the week. I don't think we fully recovered by the end of the week. It's not, sometimes we get a smooth transition in astrology. Sometimes we'll get a major event and then, the storm just really blows over very quickly a day or two after. That's not how I see this. I see the craziness lingering. I see weirdness lingering. Even little bouts or spurts of like volatile energy. I see all that lingering, and that might sound bad. I don't view it as bad, though. I really do view it neutrally. It's just an uptick in activity. That's all it is, really. So it's kind of a weird way to start Virgo season. I think Virgo prefers things to be a little bit more orderly and precise. And honestly, that's just not how I see things. I don't see this being as dramatically intense. Well, I mean, it's like the energy wants to cool off, but we still have Jupiter and Saturn squaring each other. I mean, those are outer planets. They're very slow. So that's a long-term aspect. That's, I think it's really pointing to a dramatic shift that's happening in society. So that's not going to happen overnight. That may take weeks or even months. But there's something changing about society, about, I don't know, politics, leadership, maybe the economy. There's something dramatically changing there. Because Jupiter and Saturn, more than any other planets, those are the two that have to do with like societal trends the most, in my opinion. So something dramatically changing there, and we're still very much in the midst of it by the end of the week. So really that's all I have for you. I hope that was helpful or interesting. Next week, there's a lot to talk about as well. We've got a third quarter moon happening in Gemini. Mercury stations direct at 21 degrees Leo, so that's good news for a lot of you that want that. Venus changes signs. Pluto actually changes signs as well next week, believe it or not. So Venus enters Leo. Pluto retrograde enters Capricorn again. Don't freak out. Pluto will not spend a lot of time in Capricorn. I believe it's a couple months, though. I will check that before I do this next forecast, but I believe Pluto will be in Capricorn until November. So it is a couple months, but it's not the end of the world. This is the last little bout of Pluto and Capricorn. And then once Pluto enters Aquarius again for the, I think, third time this fall, it will be there permanently until 2044. So I don't know. I feel like that's good news for some reason. And then the last bullet point for next week is Uranus will actually station retrograde at 27 degrees Taurus, which, in my opinion, is so unfortunate. I want Uranus to enter Gemini because I'm selfish and I have Gemini placements. Anyway, but I hope this forecast was interesting or helpful. Thanks for hanging out with me for this half hour, and I look forward to seeing you next week. And also, if you want a reading, please get a reading. It really helps me, helps support the channel, and allows me to post videos like this. Okay, thanks so much. Have a great one. Bye.